we could try a couple stories, and if they're spooky enough, maybe we can read them all in a series of videos. So let's see what's inside. The contents. After the introduction, the stories are split up into chapters based on theme. The themes are morbid mountains, childhood trauma, cabins, tents, and campers, middle of nowhere, malevolent waters, dark roads, small towns, ghost stories. And at the end, there's a conclusion and a section about the author. The disclaimer is that the stories you are about to read have not been proven. Due to the number of submissions that have been collected anonymously, names and attributions have been removed unless otherwise noted. Keep in mind, these stories are not told through my perspective, but through the perspective of those who experienced them or what they've heard from others. Some stories in this collection include mentions of suicide, violence against animals, or other adult themes. Reader discretion is advised. Morbid mountains. I wonder if the Appalachian Mountains will be mentioned here. I feel like that's a necessity. Why don't we read the first story and see what we're in for? The first story is called "A Goblin Creature Attacked My Dog." There's the little doggy. So, just in case anyone is super sensitive to animals being harmed, I did take a peek just to make sure, and the dog in this story escapes unharmed. So the story will be spooky, but not traumatizing. You don't have to skip. Many have echoed the belief that animals possess a heightened sensitivity to the supernatural. We seldom ponder the actions we would take if our beloved pets were thrust into a fight for their lives against an unknown creature. The field notes tell us that the location of this was like any other normal day until this is quite possibly the strangest and most intense encounter I have ever had. Not only did it happen to me, but also to my dog and my friend's dog too. In our local woods in the northeast of England, there is a path beside a cliff face, and on those cliffs there is a series of small caves we call the Banana Cave. I was never sure why, but the cliffs are made of limestone and have a slight yellow tint. Maybe it was the shape of the caves, but that's not important. Many people, locals, dog walkers like us, bird watchers, frequently use the paths we walked. Not exactly a quiet path, which is why this was as shocking as it was. My dog and my friend's dog are great, and they are amazing off their leashes. They just go and do what they do and don't bother anyone or any dogs. Of course, dogs will be dogs. Mine, being a bit of an adventurer, began climbing the bank toward the cliff face and near the caves. I called him down more than once. Despite my efforts, I noticed something had caught his eye because his head went low and his ears went back. I thought it was strange because if it was a rabbit or a squirrel, he'd have chased it. Instead, he was as still as a statue. I shouted louder this time for him to come back down to the path. Then there was a huge commotion. He went into fight mode, backing up while barking and snapping at whatever the hell it was. I scrambled up the bank myself in a panic. I made sure it wasn't a badger, as they can act erratically when cornered. My dog charged forward, and that was it. He yelped and barked, and it was awful. What I saw was a monkey-like creature with pointy ears. There wasn't any fur that was visible to me. It had a black and leathery appearance, with eyes as dark as midnight. It latched itself onto my dog's neck, hanging onto it like the way a sloth does. My dog shook and rolled, but whatever this thing was, it held on, despite running until my heart pounded against my ribcage. It seemed like an eternity before I finally reached my dog. My friend's dog joined in on the commotion as she ran past me and began barking and snarling at the creature and my dog. As I got closer, I picked up a stick and instantly swung at the little creature, terrified it was seriously hurting my dog. I hit the creature directly on the back of its head. It didn't budge straight away, so I hit it again. This time the stick broke in half when hitting its back. The creature bounded off. My dog, its movements resembling that of a playful lost footing, but eventually dashed off on all fours, climbed up the cliff face, and disappeared over the cliff edge. Luckily, my dog was pretty much unharmed. He had a slight cut above his eye, a cut on his nose, and a cut on his chest that looked worse than it was. There was just a lot of blood. I had no idea what this thing was, but my friend saw from the bottom of the bank and confirmed the exact same thing that I saw. I believe it to be some sort of goblin, but beyond that, I have no idea. I'm positive that there is at least one person who has encountered something similar prowling in northeast England, waiting for its next meal. According to local folklore in northern England, boggarts were mischievous beings that delighted in causing chaos and tormenting their victims. They were known for pranks, shape-shifting, and creating eerie noises. Superstitious individuals would take precautions to ward off boggarts, such as placing iron objects near doorways or leaving offerings of milk and honey. Naming a boggart was dangerous, as it was believed to unleash its full wrath. In the marshlands, it was thought doing so brought madness and accidents. While some dismiss these stories as superstition, belief in boggarts remains ingrained in the folklore of northern England, with some claiming to have witnessed their presence. The moral of this story to me is, this is why you should keep your dogs on a leash, unless they're actually trained to come when you call them. Because my dogs are great. My dogs don't bother anyone. But then, in the same breath, dogs will be dogs. I'm not a big fan of that attitude. But this is not something you would ever expect to encounter. That's for sure. What do you guys think that it was? Was it a boggart? Was it a chupacabra? Are they the same thing, but just named differently for the region? I don't know. That sounds pretty terrifying though. The next story is called The Cave in the Mountain. I love this. I'm liking this illustration over here. The full moon and the cave. I like the contrast of the light and dark, and it does give very spooky vibes. Okay. Humans have long since battled the call of the unknown. Peering deep into a dark cave, instinct and curiosity edge us forward, daring us to explore, despite what or who might is that only for specific people? Field notes. The location is the hills of Mexico. The time is just before sunset. The atmosphere is an unfathomable darkness, unbearably hot. I like the intros and the field notes because they can kind of let you know if this is a story that you're comfortable with or if it's something you might want to skip. I was around 10 years old when I first encountered the cave. I am the youngest of 3. Oh, sorry. I was around 10 years old when I first encountered the cave. I am the youngest of 3 to Mexican-American grandparents. In my childhood, I traveled to Mexico at least twice a year. My folks both come from a small village in the desert valley in central Mexico. During my childhood and adolescence, the village or town or whatever you'd like to call it had a maximum of 300 residents. Everybody knew everybody. You get it. As a child, going from the downtown of a major Texas city to the lawless deserts of Mexico was liberating in a way. I could do whatever I wanted at any time with little apparent consequence. I discovered a lot about myself and learned to respect life and nature while hunting and working at the hills of Mexico. A popular pastime for the folks of the town was to hike up the mountain just outside the town. It took all day to reach the top, but when you did, you could enjoy a view of the entire town and the valley while the sun was setting. It was a truly enjoyable experience. While atop the mountain one evening, my close friend from the village, who accompanied me daily during my visit, revealed the existence of a massive cave on the other side of the mountain. I've never been on that side of the mountain. There's a cave back there, I asked. It felt odd to me, despite how many times I took a trek to the top of the mountain, that no one had mentioned this cave to me. Let's go, he said, not waiting for me to respond. He got up from the giant boulder we were sitting on and started up over the peak of the mount. I followed right behind him. He had gotten me into some trouble before, but I had never really gotten hurt because of him, so I thought, why not? There are no trails or markers on the mountain. It took some searching, but eventually we found the cave. It was indeed a giant some? He asked excitedly. I declined, not wanting to go into the cave at all, but as I expected, my friend had already begun his descent. He made his way down to the first section that had sufficiently flat ground to stand on without the aid of the wooden beams. He yelled at me to follow him, and I don't quite remember how, but he convinced me to climb down into the cave. Since the beams were placed by and intended for adults, they had a considerable distance between them. My smaller frame slipped through without issue. We both stood on the small section of level ground, trying not to breathe as the smell was burning our lungs. "Come on," he said, and continued to the next beam underneath us. "I'm not going down there, man," I said back to him, my shaky voice bouncing off the surrounding walls. He didn't stop though. Although he heard me and possibly assumed I would follow him closely, he continued until the darkness engulfed him. I could hear him whistle at me from unique positions inside the cave, and eventually I didn't hear him at all. He had either stopped whistling entirely, or he went so deep into the cave that I couldn't hear him anymore. He had mentioned that once it got to a certain depth, the floor evened out, and you could easily walk deeper into the cave. Bats started to fly out in Bats started to fly out in swarms. I knew they wouldn't purposefully hurt me, but they were very loud and distracting. It was a struggle to remain in place as the tide of bats brushed by me. Once most of them passed, and I could, for sure, be heard if I yelled into the cave. I called out to my friend, "Hey man, let's go before it gets dark." I stood there waiting for a reply, but he never called back to me. I looked around, debating whether I should stay put or climb out and wait for him outside the cave. Tucked into the spaces between the rocks on the walls of the cave, I noticed a few empty rice bags. I assumed they were used for carrying the bat poop. I also noticed what looked to be clothes snagged on the edges of the rocks on the walls lower single sound of my friend's heavy, panicked breathing. I tried my hardest to see down into the darkness. But it was no use. My friend would frequently play tricks on me, so I hesitated to believe that he was actually in some kind of trouble. The sounds of panic were getting closer, though, and the distress in his breath became apparent. When he came into view, he had a look that I initially misunderstood as anger, as if he were unhappy that I didn't follow him down. However, as he climbed higher up on the wooden beams toward me, the dwindling sun illuminated the look of fear on his face. He didn't stop to let me up first. He passed by me in a hurry and was out of the cave before I even made a move. I looked down once more at the darkness beneath me and saw nothing and heard nothing. I focused on balancing as I navigated through the beams until I made it out of the cave. Once I was out, I looked around for my friend so we could leave, but I didn't see him anywhere near the mouth of the cave. I yelled for him, getting ready to accept that he had probably left me behind again and was halfway down the mountain. I called him one more time and scanned for him until I found him at the tree line, sitting next to a big rock. "Hey man, let's go before it gets dark," I said again as I walked toward him. I was so relieved I wouldn't have to find my way down the mountain on my own in the dark. He just sat there looking bewildered. I was trying to figure out what he was thinking or why he was behaving so weirdly. He started breathing heavier and heavier with each breath, and anger began settling into his face. I backed away, knowing what he could do in his rage. He was a good guy who wouldn't hurt me or anyone that wasn't truly asking for it, but while in a blinding rage, he had once knocked his brother, who just happened to be in the line of fire, unconscious. I wasn't in the mood to get floored. Okay, so that paragraph, sentence, whatever, makes 0 sense. He's a great guy and he would never hurt anyone, but one time he knocked his own brother unconscious just for getting in his way. I think this person has some blind spots about their friend and what kind of person they are. He rose from the ground and made his way toward the cave while picking up a big rock. He ended up smashing his thumb, fueling his anger further. With the rock in his arms, he walked to the opening, lifted it up, and sent it crashing down into the dark hole. The rock broke through some of the wooden beams on its way down and caused an enormous roar of echoes that filled the surrounding air. When the intense roar of echoes started to subside, my friend looked like he was getting nervous. He gave me a look and nodded toward the trees, telling me it was time to go. Whenever we hiked up the mountain, we would run down at full speed, jumping from one boulder to another. It was our tradition. The mountain's steep face was covered in decades of dirt and dead leaves, cushioning our landings. Dangerous, yes, but most of the activities we filled our days with were dangerous. We were just kids with only our imaginations to entertain ourselves. When we started jumping and hopping down the mountain, my friend was covering way more ground than I was. I tried my best to keep up, but he left me behind, seemingly without even trying. He would stop now and then to let me catch up, though. We made it back in town in about 40 minutes. We sat in my family's living room for a while, which was no more than an open-air concrete corridor with the roof made of bamboo and clay shingles. He held his hand up and showed me his thumb. It was a disgusting purple, swollen lump. "I need to drain the blood," he said, as he blankly stared at his hand. I found him a sewing needle and held it over a candle for a few seconds. I slowly pierced the skin of his thumb with the needle, and I could see it hurt him quite a bit. He was really quiet after that. Maybe it was that we turned into teenagers soon after, but every year I visited after that, he was never the guy I knew as a kid. In 2020, during summer, I received news that my good friend was discovered hanged in his room at his house. I have no doubt that he had enemies in town and in the surrounding villages who might have had something to do with his death. However, his wife said she was sure he had hanged himself. He was there with me when I went on my first hunt, when I harvested my first beehive, when I unknowingly stole a herd of cattle from the drug lord in our region, when we got lost in the desert and jumped into a well just to drink water, when my aunt unloaded her rifle on us when she thought we were trespassers, and when we were chased by a herd of bulls that got away from their rancher. I often wonder what happened in that cave that really changed him. I really regret not being there with them that day. My first thought is that all of these other stories that this storyteller mentions sound way more interesting than the story that we just heard. And my second thought is, why would you never ask your friend what they saw or experienced in that cave? You just let it go. You just watched him be different after that and just never asked. Is that a guy thing, or is that just odd? This little clip, this little side note says, bodies are often found in caves, whether they are victims or criminals. Bodies like Joseph Henry Loveless, who was a notorious criminal and bootlegger active in the early 20th century. His disappearance in 1916 remained a mystery until his remains were discovered in the Civil Defense Caves in Idaho, USA, decades later. His dismembered and headless body was found in two separate instances in 1979 and 1991. Despite the gruesome state, his remains were well preserved, allowing investigators to identify him. The circumstances and motives behind his brutal murder remain intriguing, making this case one of the most perplexing in Idaho's history. Bodies found in caves, whether they are victims or criminals. I mean, those two aren't mutually exclusive. A person can be both. or Jenkes, someone tell me how to pronounce that, come to us from Aztec folklore. They are believed to be small sprite-like beings who serve as elemental forces and guardians of nature. These ethereal creatures are usually petite in stature and are often seen without clothing. They prefer inhabiting forests, rivers, or caves and possess a profound spiritual affinity for the earth and water. According to legends, the Jenkes attacks are so terrifying that they can cause a person's soul to flee their body. Without completing a specific ritual to retrieve their soul, the victim's health rapidly declines and they meet their demise. Is that perhaps what happened to his friend? Our next story is called A Cryptid Near Mount Adams. Surrounded by cliffs, the absence of sound from heavy machines amplifies the feeling of solitude, making you question the wisdom of venturing so far, because you are isolated but not alone. Field notes. Location: Old Maids Canyon in Oregon, USA. The date and time: the tail end of a hard day's work. The atmosphere: foul air, the uncertainty of unknown intentions. In 2003, I had been working for a gravel company, off and on for about 1 to 2 years. In my first year, I was shoveling gravel under a rock crusher and clearing the belts for the crushing machine. It was the dirtiest job I'd ever had, but it built character and humbled me deeply. The following year, around late summer or early fall, my boss got a job up in the mountains on my res. We were crushing rock and layering it over the back roads for logging trucks, timber being one of the main money makers for my tribe. Aside from the Indian Casino, aka Legends Casino. But back to the job. We started in Old Maids Canyon, which is a valley located in Oregon. I had my shovel ready, but my boss told me to come with him and set the shovel down. They promoted me to roller operator. Not only was I no longer working the dirtiest job I had ever worked, but my boss gave me a $2 raise for running the roller. By the second day operating the roller, I was on my own, but stuck close to the rock crusher and trucks to get more familiar with the roller. By the third week on the job, I had gained confidence with the machine. We were paving farther and farther away from the crushing site, so the intervals between seeing the trucks that dumped the asphalt grew long. Deep into Old Maids Canyon, a truck passed me and dumped the gravel. The backhoe came in and leveled it out. And now it was my turn to back it down with the roller. I had a CD Walkman to listen to music and drown out the noisy roller. I had the vibration turned on and put the roller into gear to move forward. The truck and backhoe were gone. this like any other day of work. I was at least 5, maybe 6 miles away from the crushing site. The roller runs slow regardless, though I can't necessarily kick the sucker into 5th gear and run out of there in a hurry. I found myself in an area where the canyon and tree line bordered the road I was rolling on. The wind had picked up and blew in my direction. I smelled the stench of something that seemed like rotted meat and 7-year-old body odor. It literally made me want to vomit. I figured maybe a dead deer or elk nearby. I looked all around me and realized just how enclosed this area was with the canyon and trees surrounding me. To the left was a cliffside slightly hidden by tall tamarack trees, but I could see rock from the cliffside through them. I took my headphones off, pulled the roller over and shut it off. The smell had become so strong. I knew I had to be close to the dead animal or whatever was near the road. I heard rocks falling from the cliffs to the left, and I looked over there since it caught my attention. There was grunting, deep and muffled, as if someone or something was trying to be quiet while running uphill on the cliffs. I gazed through the trees. The wind picked up again, blowing the stench once more toward me. Through the branches, I caught sight of the thing. It had fur unlike anything I had ever seen in my entire life. The fur and body attached to it was orange-brown in the sunlight and covered a very muscular back. People have told me I probably just saw a bear. My stepdad at the time, who landed this job for me and drove a truck for this company, even said it was a bear. But I knew what I saw after spending years on my res. Many people on my res had spotted Spilier and Bigfoot, and I heard stories about them growing up. The thing grunted and whooped once it reached the top. I saw a good portion of what it was. To my amazement and anxiety, it looked like an ape bipedal. The face had the same orange and brown fur covering it, and a snout that protruded like a dog's. It was like if Bigfoot and a dog man spliced their genes and created an animal in their image. The body of Bigfoot had to have been 8 to 9 feet tall. Its eyes were sharp yellow and almost glowed, even though it was daylight. It ran away and out of sight. What happened in merely a few minutes left a huge impact on me. Realizing I was alone and miles away from people and the crusher, I put the roller in reverse, backed the thing up, and started my way back to the crushing site. The smell was gone. Everything seemed to return to as it was before. Before it happened, I didn't realize no birds or owls or anything were around. They usually fly past me and chirp along the trees into their nests. I noticed that wasn't happening at all. No one believed what I saw. I tried to tell my coworkers and my now ex-stepdad. I never ventured far from the trucks after that. If I ended up alone, my stepdad left me with a pistol to keep on saw a trickster, or spilier. I'm not sure how to say that. And it scared me to the point that I couldn't wait for this job in the mountains to be over. Once we laid gravel on all the logging roads, I never returned to this job. My mom and stepdad ended up divorcing not long after. I was 24 years old. The only person who believed me was my mom. Her brother had seen Sasquatch when he was young. My uncle Creator, bless his soul, died tragically in a car accident when I was 9, and I never got to hear his story. But he claimed he saw Bigfoot. Our mountains have creatures residing in them. Bigfoot, spilier, UFO sightings. I believe spilier saved me that day. Instead of messing with me, it scurried away and grunted once at the top of the cliffs as if to say, "You're lucky I'm letting you go," before disappearing over the top of the cliffside. I bet creatures exist all over the world that we can't begin to comprehend, hiding in places similar to where I saw spilier. But as a Native American myself, I believe that coexisting with things, even if we don't completely understand them, is a part of life. I'm just thankful that I was able to survive my encounter so I could be around to tell this story. I agree with that. I think that even in this physical realm, there have got to be some creatures out there who are just too elusive for us to have discovered. And there may be some that are too supernatural for us to have discovered. Who knows? The Yakima, a federally recognized Native American tribe with over 10,000 members, have a rich folklore that is steeped in legends and mythical creatures. One prominent figure in their tales is, oh look, pronunciation, yay, Spiliai. That makes me want to go back and reread the whole thing rightly. That makes me want to go back and reread the whole thing the right way. Spiliai. That's so much cooler than the way I was saying it. The legendary trickster Spiliai, often disguised as a coyote, that used daring and humor to teach mankind about survival and living in harmony with nature. So, by far my favorite story out of those three was certainly the last one that we just read about the Bigfoot or Sasquatch or spiliai in the mountains. The other two were just kind of short and didn't have much substance or anything to be scared of. But that completes the Morbid Mountains chapter of this storybook. And I think the next chapter I will make into a second video. So far, the book as a whole is getting maybe a 2-star for me. Also, the next chapter is childhood trauma, so that sounds a little bit more messed up. Maybe the stories will correlate. So we will